Guten Tag alle, Herr Wallis here. Heute wollte ich über das Imperfect mit euch sprechen. Today I wanted to talk to you about the imperfect, or sometimes referred to in English as the simple past. Before wir beginnen, before we start, first of all, let's ask ourselves this question. Was sind schwache und starke Verben? What are weak and strong verbs in German? Weak verbs, or sometimes referred to as regelmäßige Verben or regular verbs, or following the rules, they're very, these weak verbs follow the rules. So what that means is you are always going to be able to identify the verb stem of the verb because it will not change in most cases. There are some exceptions, and we'll go over those in a minute, but in most cases, for weak verbs, the verb stem or root of the verb will remain the same despite its many conjugations and forms. So for example, with the verb spielen, the root of this verb is spiel. So you can see this in the present, ich spiele, spielt, in the perfect, ich habe gespielt, and even in the Präteritum or simple past, ich spielte. Same with the verb lachen, ich lache, sie lacht, ich habe gelacht und ich lachte. Okay. Strong verbs or irregular verbs, unregelmäßige Verben, they have a change in their vowel normally. So for example, with the verb fahren, you see ich fahre, so you can identify the verb stem fahr in the present tense, but in the present tense third person singular it changes to a with umlaut, so fährt. And while you may be able to identify it in gefahren, you wouldn't be able to identify it in the past tense or Präteritum when it changes to ich fuhr. So essen is a similar type situation. Ich esse, sie isst. Ich habe gegessen, ich aß. So it changes, the vowel changes. Kommen, another example, ich kam in the Präteritum, in the simple past. So the verb stem changes, okay, and that's one of the identifying characteristics of strong verbs or irregular verbs. Okay, so let's, how does one form the imperfect tense? Okay, so let's talk about that. For weak verbs, you're going to have the verb stem plus the following endings. Ich machte, du machtest, and we'll just use machen as an example. Er machte, wir machten, ihr machtet, sie machten. So this te, tes, te, ten, tet, ten is a very regular form for weak verbs to end in the imperfect or the simple past tense. Strong verbs, however, will have the imperfect stem, which may or may not change its vowel. In most cases it will. And then the following endings. So for gehen, it changes to ich ging in the simple past or imperfect tense. Du gingst, ging, wir gingen, ihr gingt, sie ging. Sie gingen, rather. So you can see that there are some endings that are regular for strong verbs as well, particularly in the second person singular, du gingst, where it adds an st, and in the plural forms as well. Okay, so let's compare the perfect tense with the imperfect tense. The perfect tense is always going to involve a helping verb, which may either be haben or sein, and the past participle, which in a normal sentence order will be placed at the end of the perfect sentence. If you were to do this in imperfect, relate this same thing, it'd be machte seine Hausaufgabe. He did his homework. And the first one, hat seine Hausaufgaben gemacht, would literally mean he has done his homework. Another example, wir haben einen Mann gesehen, we have seen a man. Wir sahen einen Mann, we saw a man. Ich bin in die Stadt gegangen, ich ging in die Stadt. Now, just to reiterate at this point that the perfect tense with the past participle at the end is what is most often spoken. The imperfect you will see written quite a bit, and it is used in spoken German most commonly with the verbs haben und sein and with the modal verbs. Okay, remember I told you there were some weak verbs that do change their stem. Here's a list of them. Bringen, which changed to bracht, denken to dacht, kennen to kannt, nennen to nannt, wissen to wusst, and this is happening in the simple past. They are all going to have the same endings here, ich brachte, ich dachte, ich kannte, ich nannte, ich wusste. So it'll still keep adding those endings, but it will, that are common with the weak verbs or regular verbs, um, but they will have these stem changing. So we call them irregular weak verbs. Okay. Now, the simple past of strong verbs, let's take, for example, the verb, well, gehen again. Ich ging, du gingst, it'll add that st. Er ging, same as ich. Wir gingen, ihr gingt, sie gingen, und sie gingen. So, for strong verbs, these are the endings that you will most often encounter in the imperfect tense. Okay, now we're going to look at just a couple very important verbs, sein and haben, which you will use a lot spoken and written in the simple past tense or imperfect tense. Ich war, du warst, er war, wir waren, ihr wart, sie waren. Okay, and for haben, ich hatte, du hattest, er hatte, and you'll notice in the simple past what's very common for all verbs, whether they are regular or irregular. The first person singular, the ich, and the third person singular, the er, sie, es, will be the same. Ich hatte, er hatte, wir hatten, ihr hattet, and sie hatten. Okay, so this was just an overview again of the imperfect tense or simple past, or in German sometimes also referred to as Präteritum. Vielen Dank für das Zuschauen und Zuhören und ich hoffe, dass das auch geholfen hat. Vielen Dank. Tschüss.